my name is Jillian, and I work as the Alumni Career Counselor. So I basically work with alumni up to 10 years of graduation, for all aspects from career exploration, career counseling to job search strategy and job search coaching. So as part of my role, I do a lot of resume critiques, as well as interview coaching and so on. So I'm happy to share with you about the best ways to sort of make your resume stand out to employers. Just a quick note to everyone, during this webinar, everyone is muted, but we are a fairly small group. So if you feel like you want to share your own experiences, please feel free to just perhaps raise your hand, and then I will unlock that function for you. I will be sending out a copy of the notes after the seminar, so you'll be getting an email directly after, so no need to take a ton of notes. And if you do have some technical issues, I will do my best to help, but I'm not a technology expert, so hopefully everything goes smoothly. So I want to get started with our first poll. Let's see. Curious about where everybody is. So I'm going to launch a 2-question poll. So you should be able to see these questions now. The first is, are you actively job searching? So really curious about where everyone is in the job search process. And the second, I'm curious about what the composition is in terms of if we have more recent graduates or grads from a little bit longer away. Okay. Looks like we've got about half, let's see, about 80% of people have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. So we've got about half of folks sort of indicating that they're sort of job searching. 41% are actively job searching. And over half have graduated less than a year ago. So to those new grads, congratulations. And I hope you find this workshop helpful. And then we've got 1 to 3 years. Okay, 26%. Okay, that's really, really interesting. Okay, so we're going to get started with some research that was done a while back in terms of heat maps of recruiter eye movement. So what they did in this research is they basically tracked recruiter eye movements on a variety of different resumes, and you can see where the red marks are, where they spent a little more time than others, and other places where there is no red or yellow eye marks tracking at all. You can see that when you look at this particular example, if you're able to sort of deduce from the bottom of the resume, see how it's very paragraphy. So generally speaking, as a recruiter, the main goal is to find information quickly. The general resume scan is going to be about 5 to 15 seconds. So we need to do our best as job seekers to make it as easy as possible for the recruiter to find the information that they're looking for. In comparison, when they did the resume scan on a resume, that was a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. It has a better layout. You can see at the top, it has a nice headline. It's a lot of white space, some bold throughout, very short but concise statements that are action oriented. That there's a lot more even things. So I see Julie does not see the image. Does anyone else have any issue with seeing the image that's on the screen currently? Okay. If you do, I will put in the slides. Okay, thanks for letting me know, guys. Sorry, Julie, I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah, there is the link to the full research study that will be in the slides as well when I send them, so you can kind of take a look at there. But basically, the result is that hiring managers are going to spend more time looking at your resume when it is clean, it's professional, and it's error-free. Okay, so that being said, I want to hear from you guys in terms of what your main concerns are around resumes. So I'm going to pull our next poll. There we go. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just answering the poll on your screen there, it should say, what are your main areas of concern? And it is a multiple choice option. So what I'm hoping to do, I know with resumes, everyone is at it sort of a different stage in terms of what your main concerns are. So I'm hoping to get a sense of where the majority's concerns are, so I can sort of target the content accordingly. Okay, so just give it another second. It looks like 90% have answered. So let's see. Okay, so the two most popular areas of concern is how to customize a resume to a job posting and communicating skills effectively. Okay, with a close third of structure and not too much interest in the ATS. Okay, that's super helpful. Now, for those of you who had other, thanks, Stanish, yeah, feel free to incorporate it into the chat. So from Danish, it's always hard to talk about results and accomplishments when you're working in an entry-level position and the responsibilities are very simple. Yeah. And that is a common kind of concern that I do hear from folks. I think when we're talking about accomplishments and outcomes, I think all we can sort of do is the best. We could talk objectively about our experience. So, you know, perhaps thinking, we're going to actually have a whole section on how to think about different accomplishments. So maybe I'll put that question in the parking lot and then come back and address that if that works for you. Okay. So feel free to put some questions in the chat as well as we go through it, and I'm happy to answer ongoing. Okay, thanks, Ivan. I will touch on it for sure, and feel free to ask your questions about ATS. Thank you. Okay, so the main thing that we need to make sure of is that we have a resume and cover letter, for that matter, that is targeted to the position that we're applying to. So this is probably the most important component, because if you think back to like what our job is as a job seeker, it's really to make the job of the folks that are looking at the resume as easy as possible. So the way we can do that is basically by deconstructing the job posting. And researching the organization carefully when we can. So what we want to do is, I usually recommend using color. I find color is kind of motivating, and it also, what it does is when you look at a job posting, if you have, I usually suggest two different colors. So one color, you identify the skills and qualifications that you have that's on the job posting. With a separate color, you can identify things that you don't. Okay, with the goal of using it, or talking about the skills and qualifications that you do have on your resume, so you have a visual reference to kind of compare and contrast. For those things that you don't have, that's merely not to highlight them necessarily, but that can be really quite helpful when you get to, say, an interview stage and you have to prepare an answer about like what your area of improvement is, let's say. And it's also a good reminder to sort of, hopefully visually, that you have about 60% of what that job posting is looking for. So we want to sort of see that reference as well, because I'm often asked, you know, at what point should I apply for a job? How do I know I'm qualified? Say if you have about 60% of what they're looking for, you go ahead and apply. Now, sometimes you might not have the job posting, and that can be, you know, challenging to write a resume for a job that you're not sure exactly what it entails. Maybe you got referred by someone that you were talking to or whatnot. Now, if that's the case, You can use something called knot codes. So I'll put the link in the chat as well. The National Occupational Classification Codes, they're called, basically is the Government of Canada's way of organizing the 40,000 job titles that are in the Canadian labor market. So they generally include things like the skills that are required, alternative job titles, and main requirements that you have to do. So they can be quite a good cheat sheet usually to get started. So here's an example of that deconstruction process. So you might start with a couple highlighters, then whether or not you choose to put it on a different, piece of paper, or you create a document like a chart like this, which is my personal favorite, is it's basically two different things. You identify what they want, and I'd suggest, especially if you're doing it on your computer, it's probably good to prioritize them. So you know which elements that you should be really focusing on and putting a lot of emphasis on in your resume. Secondly, the second column, as you can see, is what you have. So let's say in this example, the organization wants one to have a solid set of group facilitation skills. Awesome. Now, then you ask yourself, okay, what is the best, most relevant example of how I can prove to that employer that I have group facilitation skills? And that usually gets communicated through a STAR statement that shows sort of the skills that you used within that setting, including trying to quantify as much as possible. So in this case, group facilitation, how many people were part of the group, how many workshops did you facilitate? When you can quantify things, and I know you can't quantify everything, but when you can, go by all means do it, okay? It does. Oh, I'm sorry, Julie, that you can't see any images. Is anyone else having the same issue? If anyone else is having the same issue, please put it in the chat. I wonder if maybe it's, perhaps it's a browser issue. I'm not sure. Okay. So anyhow, thank you for everybody to jump in for some tech support. I'm on my own facilitating today, so I appreciate everybody's advice of potentially trying to help solve that issue. So that's the qualification chart. So really you're creating a list of best examples that you're going to share. Now it might seem like, okay, this is going to take a little while, and it will, but it's not going to take as long as you might think, because the stuff starts getting, it starts repeating itself. And also what you're doing in this case is you're also inevitably also preparing for an interview, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so when you think about the customization, so we've got an option for making sure that we have that information sort of at first glance for the hiring manager. So keep in mind, the one kind of the target rule for resumes is that the first page is prime real estate. So meaning that we want to grab the recruiter's information, or grab the recruiter's attention as quickly as possible. So there are some strategies for that. Now this is going to depend on kind of what your experience profile is like. So I'll speak to a few different kind of situations that you might entail. But anyways, one of the things that sometimes is added on a resume that usually isn't a lot of value is something called the objective, where sometimes I might find that there's little short kind of statements that says like what the person's objective is, and they might start with something like, I don't know, like driven, motivated individual, like seeking a role in, I don't know, say entry-level marketing. While that sounds really good, as a recruiter, it's not generally thought to be super helpful. So from my perspective, I feel like it's better to replace that with spending more time explaining your experience, because ultimately that's your proof to the recruiter. They're going to see through your experience and understand that, okay, yep, you're self-driven, or yep, you've had this experience. So it's better to sort of explain that through proof, essentially explaining your experiences. Okay. One of the other kind of main, I think, potential pitfalls that some folks may find themselves in is using the same resume for every job. I would definitely recommend that you invest the time to create multiple resume versions that are targeted to those areas. The key areas that are going to change are going to be a profile section. So if you have a profile, we're going to talk about that. Elements that you might highlight within your education section, or what projects you're going to highlight, and potentially your accomplishment statements might change as well, depending on what you feel like they value. The other thing to consider is there's some specialized skills that you need within the type of work that you're applying to. And if so, then absolutely include those. Welcome back, Julie. So glad you can see it now. Yay. Okay. Thanks everyone for your technical support. And then lastly, the paid and unpaid experiences. So as you identified, there is about, I think, 60% of folks that are on this session today that are recent graduates. So often what I find with my recent graduates is that sometimes you've got some folks may have some super relevant experience that happens to be unpaid. Okay. In that case, sometimes what can be a good strategy to try out is to connect your paid and unpaid relevant experience together. And then the additional experience can include, say, the work experience that's left over. And that way, as we talked about before, your first page is prime real estate. So your most relevant work experience will be placed on the front page to grab the recruiter's attention. Okay. So the only sort of unsaid rule there is if you do include a section by that name, it would be just usually good convention just to put volunteer in brackets. Good question. Would you edit your resume for every job posting or to each industry you're applying to? So I'd recommend for each job posting itself. Okay. You might find that as you go forward, if you're applying to the similar types of jobs like multiple times, you're likely going to not have a ton to be customizing each time, because there's going to be a lot of overlap. But generally speaking, always look for opportunities to sort of do some tweaking, especially if you're applying to like mid to large size companies where you're having to upload your resume, because that's an indication that it's going to be an ATS that will be screening your resume. So we want to make sure those keywords fit as much as possible so that you get through the first screen, so that you get to sort of the human recruiter. Katie, thank you for your question as well. So instead of an objective section, would it be beneficial to have a professional summary instead? Yes. So what I usually suggest, you bring us to our next point, so I appreciate that, is looking at how we can use the structure of the resume to your own benefit. Resume writing, like, sure, there's some conventions in there, but ultimately I advise folks to really make the resume and work for you. So that might include the titles that you might choose to name your sections. Like, for example, on my resume, I'll use myself as an example. Instead of just work experience, I might say something like counseling work experience, so that my brand sort of comes across really quickly. So you can think about how that might align with your own experiences. But yeah, so in terms of a professional summary, yeah, here's an example. So it's known by many different names, of course, and we have a resume and cover letter guidebook that I put earlier in the chat, but I'm just going to put it in again now. And in there, I've got a whole bunch of alternative titles for sections of your resume. So choose what fits you. I personally really like professional profile, is kind of my favorite for this section. So this usually comes the very top part of your section, or your resume, excuse me. It's going to be about 4 to 6 points in length. I think of it as like a snapshot to why a recruiter or somebody should keep reading your resume. So if you think about like the job posting as the question, like, do you have these? The profile is like the answers. So at a quick glance, as a recruiter, I look at them like, okay, yeah, they've got sort of the key things that I'm looking for. Great, I keep reading. So it tries to engage me. So I'm going to show you a couple like real examples of this. But I think the key thing with this section is to avoid the generic bullet points. Avoid just say putting like excellent communication skills. That's just not enough. Like if our goal is to differentiate our documents compared with others, we need to be better than that. We need to offer proof about how we are going to use that skill in the job to which you're applying. So if we take the skill of communication skills, let's say, and let's say you're applying to a bank where you're going to have some client interaction. Super. So then we want to use that communication in perhaps interpersonal skills plus the proof or the context of how you're going to use it. So it might look like something like, ability to build strong client relationships in a professional context or something like that. That tells a little bit more to the recruiter about your experience that applies the skill that they're actually looking for. And then the other key thing is keywords, no pun intended. Just use them appropriately and just make sure you understand the language of the field. Okay, so here's an example. I've put this example together for someone in the field of communications and multimedia. So this top part is absolutely optional, but the points themselves are a good example of sort of what would be a strong profile. So usually the very first bullet point ideally starts with one's relevant experience, but focus on the core elements of the job. Okay. You'll see the client relationship building skills like proof resulting in 2 new accounts. So that might be from one experience that individual has experienced, but it's like, consider that this section is going to kind of shine a flashlight onto an area of your experience that you want them to delve a little bit deeper. Okay, so the proof will come later. So this person doesn't need to say that, what company they did the new 2 accounts. We just want to, but we would want to see that later on. Like I'd want to sort of see where that experience was underneath the job experience. So if you don't have relevant experience to what you like, and I'm going to assume that you might be referring to like kind of specific, like hard skill relevant experience. In that case, what you would do is look at the other experiences you've had and really ask yourself, okay, what are the transferable skills that I've gained from those experiences? So that could be like really from every experiences can be a wealth of skills. Like one of my favorite experiences to work with is serving, like waitressing. If folks have that experience, they have critical thinking, they got problem solving, they got tasking. There's working with multiple clients. Like there's so much stuff. There's sales, there's customer service. So there's usually several transferable skills that you'll be able to dig out from your other experiences, whether it's work, or consider that it also absolutely includes volunteer experience. And it also absolutely entails like looking at and doing a critical reflection of what your education is. So like, ask yourself, do I have any or what would be sort of the most relevant elements within my the last 4 years at Mac that would align with what I'm applying to? Maybe that's a project, maybe it's a research project, maybe it was a presentation that you did. All that stuff counts, and this is an opportunity to really highlight that. Okay. So, can you include a profile as a paragraph or bullet points recommended? So, I have seen profiles as paragraphs. However, I do recommend bullets just because it's easier for the eye to read. Usually, it is a scanning kind of. mm, Yeah, like when you're looking at resumes, you do scan them. So actually, the human eye actually scans documents in a Z pattern. So when I'm looking at a particular document, I'm scanning like from left to right and then sort of down on a diagonal back to the right. And so what we want to try to do is just make sure that the first part of those bullet points have the key skills that we're looking to highlight, and that really helps grab the attention. So hopefully that helps answer that question. And I kind of alluded to the education section. Now, this might be something that most folks already are aware, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, other by saying that uh, you have all completed a degree at McMaster. That is not an easy feat in itself. So, really think back to your experiences. Consider the projects that you might have done, treat them like jobs. I've many resumes that I see, let's say, might have like a section for projects or relevant projects. And then there will be bullet points that kind of articulate what the skills that were used in contributing to that project. If it was maybe working with a team of 5 with diverse skill sets, and we want to sort of focus on what the impact was with every bullet point. So we're going to speak about that too. But here's just an example of what that might look like. Now, for those folks who are on the session who are uh, further out, let's say, probably 4 or 5+ years for sure, the information about academic achievement and stuff starts becoming a little less kind of important to continue putting on, because presumably your work experience is sort of starting to become more important. So usually your education section is going to be start like shrinking a little bit. However, as you're further out of school, what will start growing will be your professional development. So what are you doing to sort of keep up your professional skill sets? Perhaps it's courses that you're taking, or conferences you're attending, that kind of thing. That would be an example of that. And that would be a separate section, generally speaking. Okay. So that brings us to accomplishment statements. So I know there's been a lot of questions around these, and this is sort of my favorite element to sort of challenge folks on. Okay. So I know there's a whole bunch of bullet points on the screen, but if we focus on just say one of them. So let's focus on initiation. When you think of your experiences and you're going through your resume, I think it's really important to just not get too swept up in how are you going to explain things right off the bat. First, I'd really encourage you to really just critically reflect on your experiences and ask yourself the question, in this role, did I initiate anything? And then think about it, and think about it. And because the problem is 9 times out of 10, I see this a lot with folks that I'm working with often, and I'm guilty of it too, is we forget sometimes the things that we did that were really great, whether it's because we are now used to them and they're operationalized, or maybe just because it was a little while ago. So do challenge yourself to think about those accomplishments that you had in each of your jobs, because these are the things that are really going to grab folks' attention. And as an excellent side product or side impact, it's going to help you feel really good about what you have to offer as well. If you tend to have trouble sort of thinking, or perhaps like a level of I don't know, just uncomfortableness, sort of thinking about things that you've done well, which is sometimes the case, then speak with somebody that can help you kind of ask you the right questions so that you can showcase some of the good stuff that you've accomplished within your job. Okay, so in terms of accomplishment statements, now this term is used basically for the bullet points to describe your work experiences, and volunteer, of course, any experiences. And they're a formula. So as you, hopefully if everyone has sort of like an example of their current resume, you might ask yourself or test this particular formula for all of your bullet points. So it would ideally start with an action verb, a strong action verb. I would probably suggest if you see any assists or helped or even sometimes attended, those are generally known to be as like kind of weaker verbs because they don't really say exactly what you did. The strongest action verb are ones that are descriptive. Okay. In the chat, I've put a link to our resume and cover letter booklet. And in there, I think it's approximately page 5 or so, there's a wonderful list of action verbs that are divided based on meta skills. I'd recommend using those. And feel free to kind of use them in a row too. Think about the process. Remember, we're trying to communicate elements of what you did. Secondly, incorporating the action or the relevant information of what you did. So I want to know a little bit about, perhaps if it's relevant, what the environment was like. Was it a fast-paced environment or busy environment? If it was relevant, who were you maybe working with? What type of client? Think of the 5 W's, okay? And you're really asking yourself what's relevant to incorporate. And then lastly, what is the result? So what is the outcome? What was the purpose of what you did? Now, sometimes the results get confused with only numbers. That's not the case. It could be like what the impact was of your experience and so on. Okay, Ivan, good question. How come task isn't included? Yeah, that's more about the telling the story. So when it's more like, I use the star, like with the task, when it's a paragraph format or a sentence format, but not so much in the bullet points. So it ends up being too long. So generally speaking, your accomplishment statement should be 1 to 2 lines. So here's some examples of before and after accomplishment statements, where the first bullet point explains what someone did. So it's like, okay, so this individual like maintained and updated files. Great. So that's what they did. So that's going to be not as strong as including like how they did that and what the result was. So in the second bullet point is a much stronger accomplishment statement when the person adds that it was maintained and updated patient files for rehabilitation clinic with approximately 340 regular patients. So that tells me a lot more about the scope of the experience, and that's going to be much stronger. Okay, so always begin with a strong action verb. Always remember the results, and you'll be in good shape. So this is a good example of, it's actually a resume. We have a before and after example of sort of what happens when you use job descriptions and the impact that it can make. So this particular individual, she worked at General Mills in the summer as an admitted assistant. Awesome. So you can see that the job descriptions here are more of that, like it's describing. So the person helped with general administrative duties and answered phones and emails. Yeah, curious in terms of what do you guys think about these points? That's a good question, Jennifer. Oh, sorry. Actually, I'll skip Jennifer. I'll come back to your question in a second. Sorry, Julia has offered. Oh, here comes a variety of feedback. Okay, so it doesn't really express their strengths. Absolutely. It's vague. It's not communicating their abilities very well. Absolutely. A little flat. Yeah. So it's not really engaging, right? If you have 50 resumes to read, I'm not sure this would really distinguish itself. Weak action verbs. Yeah. Assist absolutely was is an even one. Is it, Jeffrey? Good call. Lacks the tangible results. Help is an action. Yeah, so you guys have got the idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to improve this. So this is literally taking this individual's exact same experience, but it's looking at it from a different perspective. And it's sort of showing a little bit more of what they accomplished, and it's a lot more specific. So rather than say, helped with administrative duties, which who knows what that is, this person maintained a flexible and organized schedule to support coworkers with admin duties, including check requisitions, short notice, aiding the success of meeting 94% of deadlines. So that's pretty awesome. It's a lot more specific, a lot more focused on their strengths. The fact that this person, not just answered phone calls. In this one, it was answered phone calls. It was actually bilingual, answering French and English. So we want to try to make sure that when you put your examples in, that they really do give you the most bang for your buck, so to speak. Okay, so there was a question from Jennifer. Here we go. What's the best way to list various positions within the same organization? Yes, excellent question. So there's a couple different options. You could switch it around. So instead of starting with your job title, you could start with, in this case, General Mills Canada, and then put the dates on the opposite side. So it'd be 2019, let's say, to 2020, using this particular example. And then the next line would be your most recent job posting. And then on the similar side, what date that position was occupied for, and then the bullet points. And then once you're done your bullet points, you'd put the next most recent job posting or job title that you occupied, and then the dates on the right hand side, and then the bullet points of description. And that shows, like, especially helpful if you had like a progressive role. So if you were sort of promoted or whatnot, it's a really easy way to sort of showcase that to employers. So the only exception to that would be if you're applying to an ATS job, it might be more beneficial to actually treat it as two separate entries, and that way your dates are definitely going to get calculated separately. Yeah, so reverse chronological order, basically, yes, within that job. Okay. How many bullets stated should there be for each position? Super good question. There's not like a hard and fast rule. The general approach is, if you have more bullet points, it's generally thought to be more relevant to what you're applying to. So let's say you have a job that's really not like relevant. Maybe it's like, maybe a little bit, you might highlight like a transferable skill. It's fine just to have like one bullet point or even two, like if that's all you need, particularly when you have other more stronger, more relevant experiences. Generally, I don't suggest going over like 5 to 8 bullet points is probably, on the high end. Okay, but there's really not a number. Again, it comes back to explaining your experience as how you need to, like, how much, take the space that you need to explain your experience in the most effective way. Okay, and get some folks to kind of look at it as well. Okay. All right. Any other questions? And if I missed any of the comments or questions in there, please feel free to resend them. Okay, so Oh, good question, Danish. Okay, can you include a job where you worked for a short period, especially since it may be relevant? Yeah, for sure. If it's a relevant job, um, it's absolutely fine to include. I think it may depend on like, maybe what the circumstances are. But I- yeah, so it might be a little contextual, but generally speaking, absolutely. If it's relevant, it should be included. Okay. On the flip side, let's say, and this sometimes happens is, we start, let's say, get a job and it's not what we expected, and the job doesn't go well, and say it ends within a very short period of time. And I'm talking like maybe a month or two. And maybe it doesn't end on good outcome. In that case, you could just leave it off your resume if it's not something that you really want to highlight, and that would be okay. In fact, if you're concerned about, actually, I should mention, if you're wondering about the dates and things, so there is option. You could certainly incorporate month and year, but you can also include just year as well. So year is quite useful, particularly if the months don't quite add up, for example. Feel free just to use the year. It's actually my preference because then it doesn't take up as much room either, which is nice and easier to read. So now we're at ATS. So ATS generally, and most of you weren't in, super interested in ATS. So I'll go through this a bit briefly, but for those of you who are really have questions about this and so on, feel free to absolutely put some specific questions in the chat and I can answer those. So ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. So this is basically the computer software that human resources departments will purchase in order to help them go through the resumes in a way that is a little bit more efficient than, say, just having a human person going through them. One of the reasons for this is because there's actually a very high percentage of applications that are submitted to positions where the person doesn't match at all or like meet the minimum requirements. So it's just, the idea is that ATS makes that process a lot quicker. So it kind of sorts out all of the extra resumes that don't have the qualifications. And then some of the newer models will give sort of a ranking for keywords that are met and so on, that will help the recruiters sort of pare down the number of resumes that they do have to look at. So we do need to be aware of that. Honestly, it's not a huge difference compared to before. We've always had to customize letters before, even before this technology. It always had a better outcome. So now is absolutely no difference. It's just a little bit more scientific. So what we want to make sure is that couple things. One, that our resume is readable or scannable, I should say. So there are some pretty cool tools that are available that you can use to test your resume. I'm just putting one of those in the chat. One of them is called jobscan.co. If you're unsure, like if your resume is readable by ATS, you can upload a job posting as well as your targeted resume, and it will basically parse through that and identify how close you've kind of come to, I guess, speaking to the keywords of the posting. There is also something to be aware of if you are using a template of sorts. Let's say you're using sort of a nicer looking aesthetic that's a little bit more creative, perhaps like what color, the ones that you can download. Just be really sure that it is ATS friendly. So there is one that's out there that does have some free samples. I do know that is ATS friendly. So if you're seeking for a different version compared to your text, you can feel free to use that as well. Okay, the other kind of key thing is, oh, good question, Danish. Yeah, I've not seen 100% match, actually. I'd be curious if anybody on the call who's used JobScan has found like a 100% match. Usually I find that it ranges more in like the 50 to 70% range. If you can get an 80%, and that's pretty awesome. Okay. So in terms of job titles, that's one of the things that ATS is going to sort of look for. So if you have a job that has like a kind of a strange or not a super common job title, feel free to replace it with something that's a little bit more commonly kind of considered. So for example, um, guest experience facilitator, you could use customer service rep instead. That would be fine. That way it kind of catches the attention of both the humans and the computers. Okay. All right, so here's some examples of some resources I've just put together to kind of help with keywords. You can see job scans there. There's another one called Resonate. They're basically resume analyzers, so you can absolutely use those. The other piece, if you're kind of struggling a little bit or want to do something a little bit more creative to figure out what those keywords are from job descriptions, one of my favorite strategies is getting like 3 or 4 job postings that are basically the same job title, essentially it's very similar job, and then putting that into a tool like Wordle, which is a word cloud generator, and then you get a visual representation based on the frequency of the word, and so with the assumption that the frequency is most important. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a different way to sort of start analyzing keywords and things. So you can take a look at that and enjoy. Excellent question, Katie. So Katie asked, do you have to have the exact wording phrase of the skill on a job posting for it to be picked up by ATS? Okay, super good question. It's a bit challenging to answer. I mean, generally we do suggest that there is similar wording somewhere, but we also know that ATS's software, it is programmed by the HR folks. So for example, if I was using ATS for a particular job posting and I wanted somebody who could say, I don't know, use Excel for data analysis, I might use data analysis in the job posting, but I might have analyze data as well, or analyzing data, or I might have something else that's sort of similar. So like kind of using a variety of different options. So that's all that should be entered into like the back of the ATS, but we don't necessarily always know. But that being said, sometimes that what surprises people is sometimes within ATS they've programmed to look out for particular cities or education programs or like other elements of a candidate's profile to help them parse through all of the applications. Yeah, so good question, Ivan. I think that might be on the next slide. So excellent. Ivan's question was, what are my thoughts on the weight font to get past the ATS? Yeah, in every article, and I've done a bunch of reading and research, this has never been identified as a recommended strategy. Ultimately, someone's going to notice, and now ATS are a lot smarter than they used to. So I think that kind of hack came up like when ATS sort of was in its infancy. I'm going to say about 10 years ago, but the time sort of flies, or is all melded together now. But now they're much smarter. So if folks have like more advanced versions of software, I have heard that they can identify that. So I don't recommend it. So what other elements? So other things just to keep in mind is don't use a header. By that I mean the header for like format within Word, let's say. So you still need to put your contact information, but just put it in the regular body, not in the header format. If you're going to using abbreviations, just put them exactly as they would appear on the job posting, but you might also consider spelling them out as well, because chances are they probably have also spelled them out in the keywords that they're looking for on the back. The other piece is making sure that you're just following the application instructions. So way back when, there's a lot of elements of the type of document to upload and stuff. Now the majority of ATS absolutely can read PDF and as well as Word, of course. However, you always have to follow the application instructions. If they do say upload a Word document, please make sure that you've uploaded a Word document, because perhaps they have an older ATS software. So really, really important to follow those application instructions. Thank you for the tip, Danish. I'm sure everybody is definitely going to, yeah, Ivan gives you a cheers to help with that hack. I won't say it because I am recording this video, but yeah, thank you so much. So this is, I've just included an alumni success story. I won't go through it in word for word by any means, but I think one of the things I'll just sort of highlight is that if you're finding that when you're job searching, you're not getting response, and you're submitting a lot of applications and it's just like interviews are just not coming, definitely recommend to reach out and get a second opinion about your resume. It may be some elements of the resume could be improved. It might also be a job search strategy. So the resume is definitely can be like a great starting point to start problem solving and trying to do things a little bit differently, for example. But the job search strategy really does play a big role as well. That being said, there's a lot of examples that I can think of is when people have changed their resume and cover letter to make it more customized to each job. The response has been dramatic. So I do recommend definitely spending some time on the documents, as well as ensuring that your LinkedIn is equally developed, because we know that as soon as somebody gets an application before they call you for an interview, chances are they're going to look at your social media, including your LinkedIn. So ensure that they align. All right. Any other questions? Persona matches sufficient on JobScan. Good question, Katie. I wouldn't say it's scientific, but I've seen folks get as high as 75% on a really great resume. So I'm not sure if any other folks have experienced a higher percentage match than that, but that would be pretty decent, I would say. All right. I know we've just got 2 minutes left in our session, and then we got to pop over to the cover letter. Any other questions before we wrap up? Two different colors would be this color to highlight other skills. Yeah, so that was in reference. Oh, sorry. See 2 questions that came in. Okay, so to Liam, follow the instructions on the job application. So if they say that PDF is accepted, then that is the case. If not, then probably just submit a Word document, and you can't go wrong. From Ivan, is it appropriate to treat your LinkedIn as an extensive online CV in a way with majority of your experiences? Yes, for sure. Though that being said, I'd still recommend sort of creating your profile in a way that sort of showcases your brand in terms of, what you've done and where you want to go. It's still important to sort of be targeted in terms of the amount of groups that you're part of to kind of showcase your professional profile as well, and that you're kind of part of that professional networking. And then Danish mentioned I mentioned that you can use 2 different colors. What would be the best color to use to highlight other skills? sorry, Danish, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. I know I did talk about different colors when you're kind of deconstructing the job posting, in terms of just kind of picking two highlighters, having one that kind of highlights what you do have and one that highlights what you don't have, as a way to determine, A, should you apply, and B, to make sure that the skills and qualifications they're looking for are found in your customized resume. Oh, no worries. It's all good. Okay. And then last question, and I do need to wrap up. One page for every 10 years of experience. Yeah, so for jobs in tech and finance, usually one page is generally recommended. I think that's absolutely fair. The other place where I've also kind of seen the one page kind of length would be with sales jobs, particularly jobs that are like when someone's had a lot of experience. But generally speaking, you know, for majority of other fields, you know, I can say confidently that if you need 2 pages to explain your experience, take the 2 pages. That's going to be better than leaving out information that is actually valuable and that could help the recruiter make their decision. Okay, so it looks like oh, yeah, you can use, a lot of my engineers use LaTeX. That is totally fine. I'm not familiar with overleaf.com. LaTeX is ATS friendly.